Welcome back to yet another edition of the India Development Debate right here on ET Now. I'm Supriya Shrinate, and right now we're going to put the spotlight on the new Companies Act Ordinance. There is win some, lose some, but I think Indian industry can largely breathe easy because some 60 odd offences have been decriminalised with this ordinance. And what is also more important is that high corporate governance standards have been set. Remuneration of independent directors is going to come under serious scanner now, and there will be a cap on that. The big question then is, what are the implications of all of these moves as far as corporate India is concerned? Let me take it across to a very expert panel of guests who are joining us right here. I've been joined by Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti, Chairman Haribhakti and Company LLB. I've got Mr. Jayan Gupta, founder and MD SES, and of course former Executive Director SEBI. Gurucharan Das, author and commentator and former CEO PNG India, and of course Mohit Saraf, M&A partner at Luthra & Luthra. Thanks each one of you for being with us. And Mr. Gurucharan Das, it's only fair that I start talking to you about the cabinet and the ordinance that has been approved. In many ways, this is an ordinance for Companies Act 2013. The focus is on, making independent directors more accountable, making them more independent, curbing their remuneration, and all of that is one part of this. But in many ways, did corporate India invite this ordinance upon itself? The slew of cases that we've seen where independent directors were found wanting really triggers a thought. Has corporate India invited this ordinance upon itself?
Well, I don't think that, frankly, corporate governance in India is really any worse than I mean, I don't have any survey to support this, but I certainly do not think that there are examples, of course, very well-known examples that one can refer to, but there are exceptions. The more difficult question here is the almost impossible job that an independent director has, because frankly I've been on many boards and it is almost impossible to penetrate a company by an outsider. Even a head of an audit committee cannot really get down to the nitty-gritty, and so it's a difficult job, and you do want the persons to be independent, but you don't make them independent by controlling remuneration or by some of the ways that they are thinking about doing. In fact, the best directors I have found in my experience were those directors who really had skin in the game. In other words, very often private equity players were very good independent directors because it really depended. I mean, they took the trouble to spend time with the company, examining there's one good example I'll give you, and that is in Kay Graham's autobiography. She talks about Washington Post, and Warren Buffett, she says, was the perfect independent director. But he owned 20% of the company. Now that person did so much good for the Washington Post than anyone. So it's got nothing to do with all these other things.
Okay, Mr. Gurucharan Das,
with how much interest you take. You have to pay a person a certain amount.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Just give me a minute. I don't know if the rest of the panel agrees with you, and Mr. Jayan Gupta, I'll come to you as a former member of SEBI and as somebody who must have kept a very keen eye on what independent directors are doing. And independent directors in India have done great service, but they're right now in the news for all the wrong reasons. My question to you is, first, the Uday Kotak panel, which had recommended that remuneration should be in line with market cap of a company. Now the Injeti Srinivas panel also talking about a curb on remuneration. Do you see these measures having an impact on the independence of independent directors? Very often we find independent directors lacking in delivery, lacking in keeping a control on the board. They seem to have no say, like Mr. Gurucharan Das is saying, but the reality is that these measures are being brought in so that independent directors don't end up towing the line of the management or the company per se. Do you believe this is going to change that? Mr. Gupta.
First I want to make a correction that I was not a member of SEBI, I was executive director only. Having said that, I would say that I would agree with Mr. Das that skin in the game is very important. But the issue is there that in India, when you had promoters who had all the skin in the game, but then there used to be transactions which were abusive transactions which used to benefit only the promoters. As a result of which the independent director, concept of independent director emanated that there should be somebody who is independent of the owner and independent to oversee the issue. Now, I would say that independence is a character. It cannot be infused by law. Law can only infuse fear into the person. But then, having no law, having no independence, it is better to have some law so that it can drive the fear. But then, capping the salary, I would say, as Mr. Gurucharan Das was saying, that it is very difficult for the independent director to perform the role. I would say I agree him, but the reason is not because the independent director is not capable, but because of the fact that his time commitments are limited. Now imagine if a person is an independent director in 7 companies or 10 public companies, now how much time he devotes to the meeting, to audit committee meeting, something. Now that happens if you are having such a extended time commitment, then you perform the job in a very perfunctory manner. Now that is the core issue, that if you see, very good independent directors will not be taking up assignment in more than 2-3 companies, but you have got many names, big names which have got independent directorship in 7 companies, 10 companies. Now how on the earth they can devote time and do justice to this? Now coming back to the remuneration part, the issue is very clear that something leads to abusiveness. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. No, I think you make an important point that I think remuneration is important because I get your point there. I will get in Shailesh Haribhakti, and to the point that Mr. Jayan Gupta was making about the amount of time that independent directors are spending. I mean, you know, the independent board, India board of 2015-16 report says 95% of independent directors have said that the letter of appointment does not talk about workload. In fact, Indian independent directors spend about 8.7 days a year in the company board compared to the international peers who actually end up spending about 40 days a year, which is almost 5 times the amount of time that independent directors spend. Is the problem then of tenure and not so much remuneration and the kind of contracts and subcontracts or advisory functions that independent directors get into the board? Because that is where the screws are being tightened. You know, 20% of an independent director's annual income is where pecuniary benefits cannot exceed 10% of an independent director's total income is all that he can get as far as advisory is concerned. Do you believe that is the problem, or the problem is one of, you know, the number of independent directorships people have, where the time spent is very limited, and most companies have independent directors just to fill in the boxes and, you know, just to tick the boxes, so to say, comply with the rules, and largely titular positions? Mr. Haribhakti.
So let me break a few myths right here. Number one, I happen to be an independent director on the full component that is permitted. And there must be some good reason why that full component is permitted. And I can say with complete conscience that I know the companies that I sit on the board of rather well. So it is not only the quantum of time spent, but the way the entire organization gears up to performing good governance that really determines whether an independent director is able to perform the job well or not. We have had a phenomenal amount of improvement every year. In fact, every meeting I am noticing that the sharpness of the engagement is improving. The people are beginning to believe that if you have better governance, you are likely to get better economic value added and therefore better market cap. that correlation is becoming very clear in the minds of people. So I think this myth about how much time a person spends on a particular board has to be busted right here and right now. What is important is the quality of engagement. What is important is the way that the entire organization, the entire company gets involved in the practice of good governance. And therefore, the correlation has to be between the governance, quality and the economic value added.
Right. Fair point. I think that's an important clarification, an important myth being broken there. It's not just about time spent; it's also the quality of time and the quality of engagement there is. But Mohit Saraf, thanks for being patient. I want to, there are things that have gone through, and then there are things that have been put on the back burner. And one of the things on the back burner was an idea that the government was very actively toying with, which is to make some independent directors ineligible for few assignments in case a company's board is superseded, like say the one that happened in INFS. Now, is that something that's worth putting on the back burner? Because if you are indeed on the board, are you not as responsible as anybody else should be?
Let me first give a comment on what other panelists said. I think really remuneration is an important part. It does signify dependence or independence. But I think what our law clearly fails is the quality of engagement, and what they require, really the independent directors require is independent advisors, be lawyers or accountants who can advise them. And I think that's a very important. I think what you mentioned was that 40 days of time. These are very important, because if you go on a board for 8 days or 7 days, which is an average, I think whatever you are, even if you're a rocket scientist, you just cannot know the company. And therefore, the quality of engagement, the quantity of engagement, the time you spend, and the advisors, the independent advisors, all these three are required. And what we are trying to fix is the other end of the stick. That just because if you are not going to get paid well, you will be independent. I think you may be independent, but you may not be effective. And I think that's more important, is to make the institution effective, attract the best talent, pay them well, put higher duties on them, give them independent advisors so that they can understand business, they can understand accounting and legal issues, so that they can take a conscious call and actually protect against, if there are promoters who are trying to do something else, then they can at least protect minority interest. I think those are required, and I think somehow I feel we just picked up one aspect of it, that, oh, you guys were paying very well and therefore you were dependent, not independent. I think you've just picked the wrong end of the stick.
No, I kind of agree with you, and I also think, I think when we go forward into this discussion, I hope one of you or some of you are going to make the point about tenure as well. I mean, if you look at case after case, and if you look at the kind of issues that are now coming to light, whether it's Yes Bank or ICICI and all of that, the long tenure also seems to be a problem, and especially in ILNFS, I think long tenure seems to be a problem as well. But let me just pick on the other point, and Gurucharan Das, I think the other point of view is not just independent directors, but about 60 odd things being taken out and being decriminalized. They don't want people to go behind bars for some of the things, and I think that I'm presuming is a welcome change, if I may. I mean, from the time where everything had to be ended up in the court of law, I'm presuming this is not such a bad thing after all. I mean, panels suggest taking 16 offences out of the ambit of courts. I'm presuming with an evolution in how business... Sure, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so what I was saying is that's absolutely correct. I think that the law went too far. And as I was saying, that there's the role, the independent director's role is one which is very difficult, because he has to penetrate a company within a limited amount of time, and there were liabilities placed, and companies had to take out insurances for covering that kind of liability. So frankly, that is all very good, and we should welcome that. But I still feel that actually the definition of independent director is one of the problems. I mentioned to you that a private equity person who has a stake in the company, 5% stake or 4% stake, that person often gives you far better advice, and it isn't dependent on remuneration. It depends on character. A character of the person is ultimately what matters, and you can't judge that. So remuneration is not really the reason why problems occur in corporate governance. A good director, whether he's paid less or more, if he's got integrity, he's going to point out issues of governance in a board meeting, and so really the definition. What we need is independent directors who can spend more time on the company, and some people do spend more time, but by and large, I have found that directors, whether they're independent or not, they do not spend enough time, and that is the failure of the system.
Okay,
and that's a matter of character. And I agree with you. There are people shouldn't be on so many boards.
Gurucharan Das, I'll have to come in there. I've just got the last 7 minutes on this show, and we've spoken about this point. Shailesh Haribhakti, let me come in on this, and I think the question that I asked Gurucharan Das, I'd like you to take on that question as well. Is India going to be happy with recategorization of 16 out of the 81 compoundable offences and shifting them from the jurisdiction of special courts to in-house e-adjudication framework? Many people believe it's going to save a lot of time, paperwork, and needless delays to report over 40,000 cases, I think, were pending by the end of June, as far as these special courts were concerned, with very minor offences.
Absolutely. I think this is, this is extremely welcome. I embrace this with completely open arms. It couldn't have come a minute earlier, and I'm very glad that we have a responsive ministry and a responsive Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which is taking these bold and necessary steps. We were just getting clogged up. There were 80,000 pendencies in the NCLT, and important critical issues like M&A and all were getting postponed. So this is a fantastic correction. It will help us to go forward in our ranking of ease of doing business even faster. So I totally welcome this change.
Mohit, a quick question on declogging of NCLTs, and with the government aiming for a significant reduction in compounding cases before the tribunal, it is enlarging the jurisdiction of the regional director with enhanced pecuniary limits, easing conversion of public companies into private entities, and centre being vested with the power to approve the alteration in financial aid of a company. I'm presuming with NCLT now being bombarded with the kind of resolution that we will perhaps see through the IBC, this is a step in the right direction. Could this take some of the important cases out of the NCLT? I mean, as a lawyer, how are you going to read the repercussions of this declogging of NCLTs?
This is absolutely, it's absolutely a brilliant thing. Firstly, it will take a lot of burden away from NCLT. Second thing was, it was unnecessary. I think whenever we got on a call with an international client and for small technical breaches, we had to tell them that there could be an imprisonment. It was a very difficult thing to explain. So I think this is a right direction. Now you can pay penalty. These are all compoundable offences, and you have to go to MCA and they can fix that problem. And I think there was just a thought process that just because it was a criminal offence, it was an offence, it was non-compoundable, so people will comply with. I think generally people will comply whether they have to pay penalty or it's an offence. So it's a right direction. They've taken a lot of these things away, and it will improve our ease of doing business ranking. It will improve actually ease of doing business in India. Forget about ranking. It will actually make people more comfortable. because just for a small lapse, you don't have to go through the process, and it doesn't serve any purpose. And I think this is a very good thing, and it'll actually, the most important thing is NCLT will focus on relevant issues like IBC. Even small approval process had to all go to NCLT. All those things can be settled by MCA and the regional director. So I think it's a very, very good thing. It's probably late in the day, but very positive, and I think we welcome it. It'll free even legal bandwidth to do important matters than to do trivial matters.
No, fair point. And I think, Mr. Jain Gupta, the question also has to be asked on shell companies before I take a closing comment from my panel here. And the amended law proposes to reintroduce declaration of commencement of business provision to tackle shell companies. Now, you know, it is very surprising that after the Section 248 was notified in December 2016, if I'm not wrong, right after demonetization, over 2.26 lakh companies have been struck off. Another 2.25 lakh companies have been identified for being struck off as shell companies. I mean, we still don't have a clear definition for a shell company. And in that sense, do you believe these recommendations and this ordinance is found lacking? Mr. Gupta.
See, again, the shell company cannot be defined in one word or one sentence, because it depends upon the circumstances what is being done. One, you can be a shell company, or a company can be shell company because of something, and extending the definition, another company can become shell company if it is associated with a shell company. So it is very, very difficult to give one single definition, because it depends upon the circumstances of the case. So I would say that this type of problem will continue. Even if you have given a watertight definition, something or other will crop up, because we in India are ingenious people. We can devise many ways of bypassing the law. So I don't think there can be a final definition for a shell company. It will always be a fluid state, and law will take its course based on the circumstances of the case.
Okay, a quick last word, and Shailesh Haribhakti, very quickly, sir, just make it a crisp one. Given the proposed amendments that one is seeing in the Companies Act of 2013, do you think it's going to be enough to prevent the cases that we have seen, which kind of erodes confidence, which kind of raises very many questions on the credibility of Indian industry? Cases like a Satyam, cases like an Island FS.
You know, I think this is a very rapidly evolving situation, and every change that I'm seeing being put in place is going to play its own role and help in preventing an ILFS or a Satyam type thing. So I welcome change. I welcome change in the positive direction, and I think we need to applaud the fact that we have a live Companies Act. This is the first time I'm feeling in the last 3, 4, 5 years that it's not a stagnant piece of legislation which does not move with the times and as situations arise. And situations are bound to arise. But I think this responsiveness is important, and I welcome it and embrace it.
Fair point indeed. On that note, thank you very much, all of you, Mohit Saraf, Mr. Gurucharan Das, Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti, and of course Mr. Jain Gupta for joining us. This is important. Hopefully this is going to make it easier to do business in India. Hopefully this is also going to make independent directors truly independent and truly accountable. And of course, the many offences that have been taken out from and decriminalized will also help ease the burden on the system. The declogging of NCLT is important. The NCLT actually needs to focus on some big picture issues like sorting out the IBC and all of that. So in that sense, it's a welcome change, one that is long overdue. Thank you very much for being with us on this edition of the India Development Debate. We take a breather and back with Top 10 at 10.